Hey guys, how's it going? Master Cal here, and today I'm going to be doing the 9th video for my 2021 NFL offseason recap series, the Denver Broncos. The Broncos had a lot of optimism going into the 2020 season, with then rookie Drew Lock coming off of a 4-1 record as a starter, but unfortunately Lock and the Broncos as a whole underwhelmed. They had some key injuries. Lock struggled especially with turnovers, and otherwise just not a great year for Denver. So they'll have a quarterback competition this offseason in training camp, and this very well could be a make-or-break year for head coach Vic Fangio. No coaching changes for the Broncos. They'll be keeping the same staff, same OC, same DC. So the free agents they were able to re-sign, safety Justin Simmons, he got franchise tagged for the second time this offseason, and they agreed to a 4-year contract worth $61 million, $32.1 million of it fully guaranteed. And this makes Simmons the highest paid safety in the league. He slightly edges out Arizona's Budda Baker, who got $460. And pretty well deserved for Simmons, who had a breakout season in 2019, which led him to getting tagged for the first time. And despite the fact that the Broncos got a new GM, he elected to keep a young, outstanding player around, and he was able to get him locked up for the long haul. Defensive lineman Shelby Harris was re-signed to a 3-year deal worth $27 million, $15 million of it guaranteed. So he finally gets a long-term deal after having to settle for short-term deals the past couple of off-seasons. I feel like he's one of the more underrated defensive linemen in the game. He's very, very good at batting down passes at the line of scrimmage, and he's solid against both the run and the pass, so I think it was good for Denver to bring him back. They brought back a pair of restricted free agents on second-round tenders, linebacker Alexander Johnson and wide receiver Tim Patrick, so it's worth $3.384 million. Nothing is guaranteed, however. Johnson's been a starter the past couple of seasons. Patrick is coming off of a pretty good season, as he played well for the injured Courtland Sutton last year. And he could possibly be competing with KJ Hamler for playing time this year. And then they brought back their exclusive rights free agents. A defensive end, Jonathan Harris, was brought back on a 2-year deal worth $1.675 million. And then Austin Schlottman, Calvin Anderson, offensive lineman, receiver Deontay Spencer, and safety Trey Marshall were all brought back on 1-year deals worth $850,000. They are all depth pieces for Denver. The free agent signings, they signed veteran corner Ronald Darby to a 3-year deal worth $30 million, $19.5 million guaranteed. Former Bill, former Eagle, spent last year with Washington, where he had a pretty good year as their number one. And he himself is able to get a long-term deal after having to settle for 1-year deals quite a few times in the open market, mostly due to injuries in his time with Buffalo and Philadelphia. They also added cornerback Kyle Fuller, former first-round pick of the Chicago Bears, so obvious familiarity with Fangio there, on a 1-year deal worth $9.5 million with $9 million guaranteed. Fuller was a cap casualty by the Bears this offseason. He had a cap hit of close to $20 million, and the Bears wound up cutting him, and so Denver swooped in and decided to get him. He is still a very, very good corner. He's not an elite cornerback one like a Jalen Ramsey or Tre'Davious White, but he's definitely, like, I'd say, a middle-of-the-pack cornerback one, which is still pretty good. Running back Mike Boone was signed to a 2-year deal worth $3.85 million with $2.6 million of it guaranteed. The Minnesota Vikings non-tendered him as a restricted free agent this offseason. The Broncos' new GM comes from the Vikings front office, so there's some familiarity there, and he'll add some depth. They signed another former Bear, tackle Bobby Massey, to a 1-year deal worth $2.5 million with $1.575 million guaranteed. Massey was released by Chicago this offseason. He missed half the season due to injury, and his replacement wound up faring better than he did. And Massey was signed after right tackle Jawan James unfortunately suffered a torn Achilles for the Denver Broncos while working out away from the team. We'll talk about that later, but the Broncos needed a replacement, and Massey is going to be the guy at least for this year. Defensive tackle Shamar Stephen, another former Viking, was signed to a one-year deal worth $2 million with $750,000 guaranteed. A solid guy up front. Minnesota released him in the offseason for cap savings. And then the rest of these guys are all a bunch of depth signings. Linebacker Pita Talmopino was signed to a 2-year deal worth $1.815 million. Wide receiver Damian Willis, who's kind of bounced around, Browns, Bengals, maybe a couple other teams in there, signed a 2-year deal worth $1.675 million. Tackle Cameron Fleming signed a 1-year deal worth $1.67 million with $1 million guaranteed. He started at right tackle for the New York Giants this past year, but did not fare well as a starter. He's a pretty solid backup and a swing tackle, but not very good as a starter. Also a former Patriot and Cowboy. Tackle Cody Conway was signed to a 2-year deal worth $1.485 million, as was receiver DeMornay Pearson-L. They signed tackle Ryan Pope also after the injury to James, but they have since cut him. Tight end Eric Salbert signed a 1-year deal worth $990,000 with nothing guaranteed. He was non-tendered by the Jaguars as a restricted free agent. He's kind of bounced around. He's been with the Falcons. He's been with the Patriots, at least briefly. I think he's also been with the Bears. Linebacker Peter Kalambai signed a 1-year deal worth $920,000. He was released by the Houston Texans this offseason, and he'll add some special teams depth to Denver. Receiver Amara Darboh signed a 1-year deal worth $850,000. They signed quarterback Case Cookus and also punter Max Duffy, but both those guys have been cut as well. And then they added linebacker Natrez Patrick on a waiver claim from the Rams at the end of the right at the beginning of the offseason, but they have since waived him with an injured designation. Now for their cuts, cornerback A.J. Bouye, who they had acquired last offseason in a trade with the Jaguars. Bouye struggled last year. He dealt with injuries, wasn't very good when he was on the field, and on top of that, he got hit with a 6-game suspension at the end of the year. And he signed a 2-year deal with the Carolina Panthers, and he still has 2 games of his suspension, but he still has to serve out next year. Another guy that they acquired in a trade last year, a defensive lineman, Jarrell Casey. Casey played in just 3 games for Denver last year due to injury, and given his high cap hit, it was an easy cut there. Casey remains unsigned. And then right tackle Jawan James suffered a torn Achilles while working out outside the team facility, and because of that, the Broncos have attempted to void his guarantees. James also opted out last year, and he was injured in his first year as a Bronco, so he hasn't really played much the past couple of seasons. James has filed a grievance, so that means at least for now that the Broncos are carrying a cap hit while that grievance works itself out, and he signed on with the Baltimore Ravens. Tight end Nick Vanette, former Steeler and Seahawk as well. He signed out the New Orleans Saints. Backup quarterback Jeff Driscoll, who signed with the Texans. Defensive tackle Kyle Pecco, who I believe he opted out last year as well. Defensive end Joel Heath, who signed with the Lions. And safety Elijah Holder, who also signed with Detroit. For their free agent departures, they somewhat surprisingly wound up rescinding the restricted free agent tender on running back Philip Lindsay. He had a bit of a down year, but it was still a surprise to see the Broncos move on from him and lose him for nothing. He signed a 1-year deal with the Texans. Defensive end DeMarcus Walker, a former second-round pick, signed a 1-year deal with Houston. Quarterback Blake Bortles, who was a backup for them last year, signed with the Green Bay Packers. Edge rusher Jeremiah Atochu signed with the Chicago Bears. Linebacker special teamer Joseph Jones signed with the Buccaneers. They non-tendered restricted free agent linebacker Austin Calitro, and he also signed with the Bears. They acquired Calitro in a small trade with the Cincinnati Bengals before last season. He's a key special teamer as well. Right tackle Elijah Wilkinson signed with Chicago. Safety Will Parks signed with the Chiefs. The Broncos had allowed Parks to leave in free agency. Last offseason, he signed with the Eagles, but he wound up getting cut in the middle of the year, and Denver claimed him off of waivers, and now Parks is on another team again. Cornerback Devontae Bosby signed with the Las Vegas Raiders. Tight end Jake Butt was non-tendered as a restricted free agent, and he also signed with the Bears. Fellow restricted free agent tight end Troy Fumagalli got non-tendered, but he signed with the Patriots. Their unsigned free agents are going to be veteran tackle DeMar Dotson, cornerback Kevin Tolliver II, who was non-tendered as a restricted free agent, and defensive lineman Sylvester Williams. Broncos had one notable trade as they acquired Teddy Bridgewater from the Carolina Panthers in exchange for just a 6th-round pick in the 2021 draft. He had 2 years left on his deal, and they signed him to a new contract. It's worth 1 year, $11 million, $10 million of which is guaranteed. The Panthers are paying down $7 million of that, so the Broncos are only paying up to $4 million of his contract. Bridgewater had a pretty solid-ish year as a full-time starter for Carolina last year. The problem was that Bridgewater lost a lot of close games for the Panthers, wasn't able to lead them to a lot of come-from-behind wins, but as far as numbers go, he was pretty solid. And so the Broncos are bringing him in to compete with Drew Lock. So you got two very opposites, as Bridgewater is a play it safe, check it down kind of guy, avoid turnovers, while Lock is a guy who likes to sling it all over the field. Now on for their draft picks. With their first-round pick, they took Alabama corner Patrick Surtain with the 9th overall pick. One pick after the Panthers took J.C. Horn, the Broncos went in with their corner. That was kind of a surprise given the fact that the Broncos already have a pretty good cornerback room, but it's not a bad idea to have extra corners on the roster, and Surtain doesn't have to start right away. He can develop, especially because rookie corners do tend to struggle initially, and he can maybe be a starter by next year or even sooner if there's any injuries. They traded up in the 2nd round and took UNC running back Javonte Williams with the 3rd pick in the 2nd round, and so he will be a guy that will replace Phillip Lindsay, and there's been some rumblings that he could possibly see more playing time than Melvin Gordon this season for Denver. With the 34th pick in the 3rd round, they took offensive lineman Quinn Miners. They wound up trading back in the 3rd round with the New Orleans Saints. Miners was a guy that a lot of people were high on, a guy from a small school, and they envision him being able to play all over the offensive line. He'll probably be a backup at least for now, but we'll see in the future. They took Ohio State linebacker Baron Browning with the 41st pick in the 3rd round. They took a couple of safeties in the 5th round, Caden Stearns with the 8th pick and Jamar Johnson with the 20th pick. Receiver Seth Williams was taken with the 35th pick in the 6th round. With the 9th pick in the 7th round, they took cornerback Kerry Vincent Jr. With the 11th pick in the 7th round, they took defensive end Jonathan Cooper. And with the 25th pick in the 7th round, they took defensive end Marquise Spencer. Broncos have not signed any players to extensions. That is, if you don't count Justin Simmons as the franchise player, I guess you can technically say he was signed to an extension, but we already talked about that. No one else is signing new deals. For injuries, we already talked about Jawan James and the Achilles injury. On a similar note, receiver Deshaun Hamilton wound up suffering a torn ACL this offseason, and he also suffered the injury while doing his own workouts away from the team facility. And in Hamilton's case, it was really, really rough timing for him because he was kind of buried on the depth chart of the Broncos receiving core with them getting Sutton back from injury and bringing back Patrick and whatnot. And the Broncos were listening to trade offers for him. And in fact, the Broncos were actively discussing a trade that would have sent him to the 49ers right before he wound up suffering the injury. And then unfortunately with the injury being suffered, the Broncos won't be able to trade him. He'll have to miss the entire season, and he'll have to sign elsewhere. The Broncos will lose him for nothing as a free agent in the 2022 offseason. Okay, so my thoughts on the Broncos offseason. I thought they did pretty solid. The Broncos did a really good job of beefing up the defense, especially the secondary. That secondary looks like it could arguably be one of the best in the NFL with Fuller, Darby, Callahan, Simmons, and Kareem Jackson. By the way, Jackson was released and then re-signed to a cheaper deal. So obviously that's good. Broncos Broncos added some weapons at receiver and running back. The big question, though, is going to be who's going to be the starting quarterback, and will the quarterback play be good enough for the Broncos to make a run? I think the Broncos have enough talent to be a wild card team, albeit in a very tough AFC West. But again, quarterback play is going to be the big determining factor for that. For the needs that I listed off, I mentioned quarterback as a potential position of need if they wanted to upgrade from Drew Lock, and that's exactly what they did in trading for Bridgewater. Lock still will have a shot at competing for the starting role, and we'll see how that plays out in training camp. I mentioned defensive line. That was definitely addressed by bringing back Harris and also adding Steven as well. And they're also going to hope for some other guys like Draymond Jones and McTelvin again to take more steps forward. Linebacker, yes, that was addressed. They brought back Alexander Johnson. They drafted Baron Brown, and they added some guys for special teams. Cornerback, yes, that was certainly addressed. And safety, yes, that was also definitely addressed with Simmons and Fuller and Darby. For the secondary needs, I threw out running back and tight end. Running back was definitely addressed with Javonte Williams and also Mike Boone. For tight end, that was probably more for depth reasons. They did add Eric Sauber, but they did move on from a number of tight ends as well. So, yeah. And overall, I'm going to say the Broncos had a B+ offseason. And again, you know, the quarterback play will determine how successful their season is. And the Broncos are going to be under some pressure to win now with Vic Fangio. If they don't, they could very well be looking for somebody else in the next offseason. So the projected starters for the Broncos entering training camp: quarterback is a pure competition between Bridgewater and Locke, and the reports have indicated that there doesn't seem to be a clear front runner, at least for now, which is actually a good thing. It's both guys have been good. It's not like both guys have been equally bad. It's both guys have been equally good, I think, from what I've seen. I think Melvin Gordon will be the starter, at least for now, but if Javonte Williams is impressive, he could certainly outplay Gordon, who didn't really play especially that well last year, at least in my opinion. I had Gordon in my fantasy team, so that's probably why I didn't think he did very good. Garrett Bowles, who had the best season of his career last year in a make-or-break 2020 season, will start at left tackle. Dalton Reisner at left guard, Lloyd Cushenberry at center, Graham Glasgow at right guard, and then Massey at right tackle. So very similar offensive line to last year except for right tackle. Wide receiver is going to be Cortland Sutton and Jerry Jeudy will be the 1 and 2, and then the number 3 will be a competition between Patrick and Hamler. Noah Fant will start at tight end. For the defensive line, it's going to be Shelby Harris, Mike Purcell, and then Draymond Jones. Linebacker, you'll have Von Miller, who's coming back from injury. The Broncos elected to retain Miller, and he's in the final year of his contract. We'll see if he can have a good season, because, again, he missed all of last year due to injury, and he didn't have the best 2019. For linebacker, Johnson will be one starter. The other starter, I think, will be either Josie Jewell or possibly Baron Browning. Bradley Chubb, obviously, off the other edge. Cornerback will be Kyle Fuller, Ronald Darby, and Bryce Callahan. And then safety, Justin Simmons and Kareem Jackson. So that's going to do it for this video. I hope you guys enjoyed, and stay tuned for the next off-season recap video.